Kono heni koban arimasu ka? Kogo masugu ni migi. Migi. Down the hall to the right. You'll see the station. Yeah. Policeman there and everything. It's good. Announcement. Would Scooby come to the cafeteria and fetch Shaggy? He's been at the all-you-can-eat buffet bar again. He can't move. So if you would drag him back to your room. Thank you. Let's see what's up next.
Hello, DemiCon attendees. This is Rachel Aukes. I am coming to you from my home in Ames, Iowa, and I am here to give you a book reading. So I have selected Rogue Planet. It is the latest book in my Flight of the Javelin series. And what I am going to do is read to you chapter 4, where it's not Throttle. It is one of Throttle's friends / not always friend, competitor, Punch, who is also in the service with her. So chapter 4, I need my glasses. I cannot read anymore. There. Okay, chapter 4. Punch had the high spirit clear of Free Station's docks in 3 minutes flat after the restraining cables were retracted. Adrenaline surged as he finally acquired the freedom he desired since receiving the message 4 days earlier. Before that, he'd given up all hope. He went through the notions of being a marshal, but felt numb to everyone and everything. He couldn't function without stims. He couldn't sleep without pills. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ship blowing up over and over and over. He'd sent messages on the communicator that his contact had sent him, but there'd never been a response. And he knew why. His contact had been on that ship, along with his daughter. No one knew about Macy. It had cost Punch a lot of credits and just as many favors to keep her relationship to him a secret. Marshals had a knack of making enemies, and Punch had made more than most during his time wearing a badge. Any relative, especially a 9-year-old daughter, could be a target, just as little Sophia Mercier had been for her aunt, Marshal Caterin Mercier. Being sent to retrieve Sophia had been a sucker punch for him. The kidnapped girl was the same age as his daughter. Seeing the torture Sophia had been put through at the hands of her captors only added to his nightmares of what Macy had suffered before she died. He'd racked his brains trying to figure out how they'd found her. He hadn't made a mistake. He'd been too careful. That they'd taken Macy without being noticed worried Punch. He was up against pros. Problem was, he had no idea who they were. He didn't believe in aliens, but whoever his contacts were, they were skilled. The communicator that had arrived in his mailbox 4 months earlier had no electronic signature, not even a serial number to trace. He'd never spoken to Macy's captors, only exchanged messages. He'd spent every free minute trying to find out who they were and where they had his daughter, but he hadn't been successful. They were smarter than Punch, and he hated it, especially since it was the bastards blackmailing him. He'd been about to hand over what they demanded when their ship was blown to bits. Seconds before that, he received a status request on his communicator. He'd replied that he had what they wanted, then silence. 90 days, down to the exact hour, had passed with a numbing silence. He'd assumed that both his contact and his daughter had been killed in the blast until another message came. It arrived in the middle of the night. He'd been awake. Sleep didn't come easy anymore. He thought he'd been hallucinating until the second chime echoed through a small cabin on board the Javelin. The first message had contained only 4 words. Confirm possession of package. But what had come next was a 3-second video of his daughter. He pulled out the communicator and watched the video again. He'd replayed the video at least 100 times since he received it, and he knew he'd watched it 100 more times before he arrived at the coordinates where the handoff was to take place. The small screen showed Macy, her long black hair looking cleaner than it had been in the previous videos. They'd allowed her to bathe recently, though she wore the same blue shirt in all 3 videos they'd sent. She stared at the camera with a tired gaze, as though she'd been woken for the recording. She didn't look tortured, at least not physically, but her eyes had a haunted, far-off look to them, and he craved to hold her in his arms again. He'd handled a kidnapping case once where the kidnapper had imprisoned 6 women over 4 years. All had been traumatized from being tortured. When he checked in on each of the survivors a year later, 5 were on the road to recovery. The 6th woman had been found catatonic, and she never came back to life. That 6th woman had a glazed look in her eyes, just like Macy had. He hoped her jailers had drugged her and not that she was suffering an emotional breakdown. His heart ached. "Hang in there just a little longer, Pumpkin," he said softly at the video. So yeah, Punch quickly became one of my favorites in this series. Even though I had first focused on Throttled, I knew she needed some friends, and he does some things that ends up, of course, getting Throttle and the gang pulled in on his new little adventure. And one of the things you'll find in this book, Rogue Planet, is there is, of course, a rogue planet in it, but also a black hole. I've always found black holes fascinating and wanted to include one in a story. And this story just seemed perfect for it. Everything all fell into place. And with a little bit of research, we pulled both a black hole and a rogue planet into it. So it is out now. It came out through Athon Books just late last year, and it's available on audiobook, ebook, and paperback. So that wraps up this book. And of course, I'm working on some new adventures for you right now. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy the rest of DemiCon.
Students of Osaka Cartoon High School, this is your principal, Neko. Reminder, it's the weekend. You're supposed to be quiet. Actually, some of you aren't even supposed to be here. And stop yelling bananas, bananas, bananas. It's really, really loud, minions. Go somewhere else right now. I know we have Godzilla rampaging outside, but be quiet. Principal Neko signing off.
I'm Susan Liebhart, your Toastmaster. And this is the DemiCon channel.